Hello, and welcome to Saving People, Queering Things, a Supernatural podcast. We were previously known as Driver Picks the Podcast, and the episode you're about to listen to was recorded under that name. Though our name has changed as of season 3, our show hasn't changed that much. Our structure and theme-based discussions are the same, and we're so glad you're here. Now, let's get on the road. Hello, and welcome to Driver Picks the Podcast, the show where we talk about ghosts, road trips, and free will through every episode of the TV series Supernatural. Today, we are exploring Season 2, Episode 8, Crossroad Blues, through the theme of commitment. I am Abigail, your host, and joining me today is a very special guest, Jay, who I first met on Supernatural TikTok of all places. Can you introduce yourself and tell our listeners about a little bit about your experience with Supernatural and why you love the show, and also where they can find you?
Okay. Hi, I'm Jay. I go by they, them. I've been a Supernatural fan since the very beginning. I tuned into season 1, episode 1 live when it aired way back in 2005. No, I fell in love with the series literally as soon as I saw Dean come on the screen and go, "Easy, Tiger." I was hooked. I was like, listen, I'm here for it. I don't care what the premise is. I am seated and ready to go. But then I found out that the show was like, it was about family, and it was about hunting and monsters and paranormal and all of these different features. And then they added all these different religious aspects and things to it. And it just became deeply interesting and something that I hadn't seen on any other show up until that point. As for where you can find me, like you said, I am on TikTok. My handle is JSTL, which is JAISTIEL.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks so much for that introduction. I was really excited to have you because I love watching your content and seeing the connections that you make across the series. You've seen up to the end of season 14, correct?
Correct. I've seen probably season 1 through 10. I've probably seen easily like 20, 30 times. The later seasons, 11, 12, and 13, I've only seen a handful. I have seen season 14 completely through once, and I was halfway through another rewatch before I started back at season 1. Like you said, on my TikTok, I do, it's I'm called the Queen of Unpacking Supernatural because I go episode by episode and break down the different directing choices, acting choices, writing choices, lighting choices, all of those different minor expressions that happen during the episode that make it as detailed as it is.
Because there's so much in this episode. This is one of my favorite
really is.
episodes. I have always loved this episode. Even when I first watched the show, and like I watched the show, and a lot of it, like I jumped in. I don't remember what season was airing, but I wasn't watching it live. I caught up and then was. But I was not really in Supernatural fandom online spaces, so I got kind of that first time rewatching it where I didn't know what was coming, right? Which I'm really glad for. And I remember this episode because this episode just is kind of gutting in certain elements of it, especially when you don't know what's coming next. And you, so it was fun to relive that a little bit as I've been now doing this new rewatch and reliving that like process of unraveling the mystery of season 2.
That's one of my favorite things about a rewatch is every time I get to an episode, even with as many times as I've seen that episode, I still remember how I reacted to it the first time, what I felt the first time, what my thoughts were the first time. So now going back to it, seeing it in a different lens from what's happened since then, it's really nice to have that compare and contrast, even within myself, of how things progressed and what things happened because of these specific moments. And it makes those moments stand out even more so, which is why I like doing things like this where we get to analyze episodes, because I'm like, yes.
Yes, it's such a good time. It's such a good time. So we will, without further ado, we'll start jumping into it. We're going to start with our series recap, The Road So Far. So after spending most of his adult life hunting for the demon who killed his wife, John Winchester is dead, having traded his life for Dean's, and the demon is still at large. Despite having no new leads, Sam and Dean, both avoiding their grief in different ways, are still on the road hunting. What we know as viewers is still unknown to the Winchesters, namely the real way that Dean survived through John making a deal. Both brothers are haunted, but in different ways, with the mystery of John's death weighing on them and the question of what John told Dean before his death, coloring his interactions with Sam and the hunt. The morals of the story are also getting grayer, with complicated cases involving more than a shoot first, talk later attitude, and Sam and Dean clashing over how to handle the continued search for the yellow-eyed demon. And that brings us to this episode and to our 30-second recap. Would you be willing to count me in? Just give me a 3, 2, 1, and then I'll start.
3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, so in this episode, we figure out how John actually managed to save Dean's life, and Dean and Sam find out about it. They find out there was a Crossroads deal because they are in a town where a number of people who have been making deals have been dying, and with these reports of these black dogs. And so Dean is originally skeptical and is having these discussions about, well, maybe they deserved it because they made that choice. Sam is really insistent on, we need to save these people. They are able to save one of them, but Dean is really questioning whether or not he should have survived at all.
Wow, that goes so quickly.
It goes so fast. It goes so fast. Okay.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay. 3, 2, 1, go.
So Dean starts to shift from his black and white thinking that was taught to him by John into more of a morally gray area, which is likely due to finding out that his brother is a chosen child by the demon that they're hunting, and as well as those stories that they're hearing from the people being hunted by the hellhounds. I also really enjoy the brotherly aspect that gets tied in throughout the entire episode. Oh no, there's 7 seconds left and I have run out of things to talk about.
So that'll bring us to...
God bless.
Thank you for that. That was amazing. I appreciate the perspective you brought to it. It is now time for us to discuss this episode through our chosen theme. And this week, our theme is commitment.
The biggest thing that I take away from this episode is Dean's shift in his moral compass. So John taught him, just like him, to be very black and white. Monsters are bad, humans are good. There is no in between. So Dean grew up with that black and white thinking, but certain things have been causing him to reassess that and shift more into a morally gray area. And it's like this internal battle of his commitment to his father's teachings, but he also wants to do what's right and what's good, which is what John taught him to do the right thing. So it's like this battle of commitments inside Dean right now of committing to his father's teachings, but his father's teachings are very contradictory. He taught him that monsters are bad, but he also taught him to do the right thing. So in this specific scenario where he is faced with a demon, which obviously would be considered bad, and he wants to kill the demon, he also is committed to saving that person and his wife. And he knows that if he exorcises the demon, she will come back and kill them both. So it's like, do I kill the monster because that's what John would want? Or do I save the humans because that's what John would want?
Right. I had not even thought about that particular difficult decision, but that's actually so interesting because at the beginning of this episode, when they first figure out it's a Crossroads deal and that's what's happening, Sam's instantly like, okay, we got to figure out how we can save these people. And Dean's like, well, they kind of signed up for it. Like, they knew what they were getting into. You make a deal, like, especially if you make a deal, like the first 3 victims that we see are people who made deals for talent or fame. And it's very clear that Dean has like no respect for making a deal for those reasons, where he's like, you freely made that choice. No one was twisting your arm. Nobody put a gun to your head and was like, make a deal. It's not as difficult of a decision. Yeah, like Sam really has to drag him along and be like, yeah, but they still don't deserve to die. Like, we still want to save them. They still don't deserve like this gruesome, horrific death. Right. And as soon as they encounter the man who made the deal to save his wife, Dean's like whole tune just like instantly shift. Instantly, it's a much more difficult decision because it's desperation. So that moment is when he discovers that it was for his wife. Dean shifts twice. So he initially goes in there with you deserve this, you made this deal free and clear, like you knew what was going to happen. And then when he finds out that it was to save or that it was, for his wife and to save his wife, he instantly shifts into this more
understanding and softer, like, oh, I can understand why you did that, because, if it came down to it, I would absolutely do that for my family. But then he shifts again before he leaves the room, because something in his mind clicks that, oh no, I think that's what John did for me. And now I'm the one left with that guilt. I'm the one left without him. I'm the one with that struggle. And that's not fair to put on the surviving person. Well, so Dean shifting 3 times in that short amount of span is literally that battle between what John told me, what I feel is right, how I feel as the person that's left behind, like all of these different things colliding with each other.
He has this moment of like the man says, I would do it again. Like, I did it to save her. I would do it again. And Dean's like, actually, you maybe did that you did that for yourself. Like, you couldn't live without her. And you can see the wheels, like you could see that those wheels shifting in his head.
Yes.
Of I think this is maybe what John did. And also Dean, through this whole season so far, 8 episodes in, Dean has just been like super weighed down by what happened to John, and also just like not knowing what happened to John, except in I think 2 episodes ago, there's an episode where he actually like verbally states, he's like, I died. Like he knows that in episode 1, he knows he like should have died, and so much so that he even identifies like, I did die. I'm not supposed to be here.
Right. It wasn't I should have died and somehow I survived. It was I was dead and somehow here I am.
Yeah. And he's made that now he has explicit proof that it could have been because of John. And then by the end of the episode, he gets explicit proof that is exactly what happened. But yeah, like that softening is really, really interesting. And the fact that he identified, and it's so interesting because he identifies that like, the desperation to not lose someone makes you do something that ultimately means you're just shifting the burden of loss from yourself onto them. Like, you are self-sacrificing, so you are saving them, which is this beautiful and noble and kind thing, but you also are guaranteeing that eventually they're going to lose you. And that's what makes Crossroad deals so interesting in this show, because they always involve commitment, but they also like involve commitment on the part of the person making the deal, but they also involve like an involuntary commitment on the person who, if it's a deal to save someone's life, the person who didn't ask for a commitment, but now is also tied up in this and will have to suffer the results of that commitment. And the lines that Dean says, like, we know, if you do not know what happens at the end of season 2, be wary. We are going to talk about it at a few different points. But the lines that Dean says about that are so interesting, because he says to the man says, I'd have died for her on the spot. And Dean says, you ever think about her? Which is so interesting, looking both backwards and forwards. Like, we're halfway through the season. He's looking backwards at what John did for him. And then,
but he's not seeing forwards.
He's not seeing forward to, like, it's not going to be very long before you're going to be in this exact same situation. And guess what? That exact same desperation is going to lead you to make the exact same decision. And he almost does in this episode as well. Like, he almost literally does.
Right. And that's one of the things, like, even through the theme of commitment, it's, there's so many different ties to commitment with Dean in this episode, because initially he's committed to thinking his dad couldn't have possibly done something like that. But then the suspicion grows deeper. Like, and once we actually get that confirmation at the end of the episode, I think, at least for me, the first time that I watched this episode through, I was convinced that he was going to take that deal. He was absolutely going to take that deal. But when he doesn't, it kind of reinforces the fact that he chose, I even wrote it down, he chose to be committed to saving people instead of hunting things.
Oh, like, okay.
In that moment, he chose to be committed to saving people instead of hunting things, because, like I said earlier, he could have killed that demon, but she explicitly said, if you do that, I will come back and not just kill Evan, who his soul is owed to me. I will also kill his wife and anyone around them. This whole moment loops back to his abandonment issues. So when he initially goes into it with Evan about did you ever think about her? He's speaking from his abandonment issues of, you know, my mom is gone, my dad is gone, Sammy had originally left me. In this moment, when he's talking to Evan, his abandonment issues are saying, you didn't think about her, you did it for yourself. But later this season, when he chooses to save Sam, it's not out of abandonment issues, it's out of a love to save Sam.
Yeah, it's especially when we also look back at like John and his reasoning. Like we kind of identified Dean, this is coming from Dean's abandonment issues. And up to this point in the series, not one person in his life has not like left. Everyone has left. When Mary left involuntarily, like Sam left voluntarily, John left many times voluntarily. The interesting thing with John, because like John and Dean, when they both make these deals, they make it for really different reasons. Like you pointed out, like Dean makes this out of like just this love for Sammy, this like Sammy didn't deserve to die. Like John doesn't make the deal because he's afraid of abandonment. John doesn't make the deal because he's afraid of being left. John makes the deal, I think, it's so interesting. John's deal is so interesting.
I have very specific thoughts on why John made the deal.
Okay.
And I don't know if they're well received. I don't know if everybody else thinks them, but it's something that I hold it's so solid in my mind. John knew that it was the only way to win. John's motivation has always been winning. Yeah. We know that his love for the boys has always been circumstantial and second place to winning.
And conditional.
Yeah.
I can show my love if I can also accomplish my goal.
Demon, if I can always, exactly. So we know that John's motivation for making that deal was not love based, because if he truly loved his sons more than he wanted to find this demon and kill this demon, he never would have taken them out hunting. He never would have put them in so many bad positions. He never would have left them. You know, there are many things that he never would have done if he loved those boys as much as Dean loves Sam.
Yeah.
So we know that the deal was not made for just purely love.
No, I think it's not love for Dean, particularly.
Right.
At least.
Particularly. I think the only reason that he truly made that deal is he knew it was the only way for it to be accomplished, because he knew that without Dean, as much as he is passive aggressive to Dean, he does know that Dean has very good hunting skills, that he also wants to find this demon and kill this demon.
And then he's loyal, and Dean's loyal. Dean would stick with him.
Correct. So he knew that even without him in the picture, Dean would still hunt this demon, because now he has even more motivation. It's not just his mom, it took his dad too.
Yeah.
And he knew that Dean, like you said, he's very loyal to John and how John raised him and the black and white beliefs. So he knew that by making this deal, Dean would eventually succeed and his goal would be completed. Yeah. But he knew that if he didn't make this deal and Dean died, there was no way John was going to be able to do it on his own. And then Sam would have been, you know, the special kid, and everything would have fallen apart. And who knows
where Sam would have ended up too, because I think if Dean dies at the beginning of season 1, or season 2, I don't know that Sam and John stay together very long. And I actually don't think they do, because of the fallout from the end of season 1, because of everything that's happened. Their relationship is so fractured. And if on top of that, John is the reason Dean is dead, because Sam would absolutely draw that line and he'd be correct to do so. John put them in the way of the demon, and Dean is dead. Sam is, who knows where Sam ends up. And then that becomes much more difficult because of John knows some things about Sam's abilities, about why he has his abilities. It becomes a lot more difficult for any of those things to happen. And again, it's in this like irony of John setting Dean up as this good little soldier and being like, I can trust that if I sacrifice myself, you'll still accomplish this mission.
Right.
And then the real interesting thing there being, of course, that Dean, as soon as John is dead, Dean has the freedom to start imagining John differently, because he now can start to see, you know, like when it's the thing when someone's like in your life or alive, or when someone has a lot of power over you in a practical sense, it's to your best, especially when you're a child and that's a person of authority or a person who's supposed to be your security. It's really easy to convince yourself that they're good and convince yourself that they have your best interest at heart, because that's how you survive internally. And Dean has been doing that with John for his whole life, imagining John as a good father, because that's a survival tactic, and he did that his whole life. As soon as John's dead, he doesn't need to imagine John as a good dad anymore. He can start to like actually unravel that he wasn't, and that's breakdown is what's been happening all season. And so then you get to an episode like this, and he is yelling at Evan about like, you didn't think about how she would feel once you're gone. And that's directly because he's like, Dad didn't think about how it would feel for me to carry that weight. And it's so, so interesting. Do you have another?
I also think it's really interesting, the painter. I think the painter is probably one of the most interesting that made the deals, because he even says, I asked for talent and I should have asked for fame, because he's sitting here 10 years later with all of these beautiful artworks surrounding him and still living in a crappy apartment with no money, no love, no nothing to his name. And they specifically ask him, was it worth it? And the man flat out tells them no.
Yeah.
He said that he's ready to die, that he's ready. He knows that he made the deal. He willingly and freely made the deal. He's ready to die, ready to go to hell. He knows that it's going to happen. And now looking back, he realizes that it wasn't worth it. But then on the flip side, when we get to Evan and he says, you did this for your wife. And he says, and I would do it again. I think that flip and that opposing force is truly exactly like, that's what commitment is about. Mm-hmm. His commitment was to his wife, making sure that his wife survived, making sure that she lived a full and happy life. Yeah. Whereas the others were all committed to themselves. They were committed to, I want to be better. I want to be famous. Even the first guy, the architect, he never had shown any architecture like desire or anything before that. His friend even says it. His pure desire, he just wanted to be better than his friend.
Yeah.
And he knew that his friend was a good architect. So he was like, I want to be the best at architecture. Yeah. And poof. So it's really polarizing that we see that the first few are all, I want this for me, and myself. Whereas Evan was, I understand that I'm going to die. I understand that I'm going to go to hell. I understand that I'm going to burn for all eternity, basically. And I would do it again.
And I actually do not regret it. He's terrified, but he does not regret it. And that's interesting when we look also at like the contrast between Dean and John, because again, like you said, Dean, like John, having done this out of strategy and out of like his own personal desire for this his revenge mission, his own vendetta that he's been chasing for 20 years, versus Dean, who chooses not to make the same deal and saddle Sam with like losing Dean in 10 years. The contrast of like choosing of like what you commit to and why, because Dean chooses not to make that commitment out of a love for Sam.
Correct, because he didn't want to have to leave Sam behind.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't desperate at that moment. It was just, you can have your dad back. It wasn't desperate. It was a want. It was something personal for him.
And he doesn't
Whereas
choose it.
Later on in the season, it's not something for him. It's for someone else.
Yeah. It's showing the like, even just the contrast between John and Dean in terms of that, because we get so much in the first season, particularly where we're getting these parallels between them. We're getting this like, Dean tries to be like his dad, and the further we go into the season, the more they diverge, and the more Dean just doesn't look like John at all. And this is one of those moments of it that doesn't seem like it, maybe on the surface, and doesn't seem as significant, but is really significant. And like we get all the symbolism of like the crossroads. I mean, even the crossroads are so interesting.
Listen, that was something else I wanted to talk about. I don't know if it's going to be something else that comes up later, but one of the things that always stands out to me in this moment, or in this episode. So it's common knowledge that Dean is seen as the fighter, as the brawn, as the soldier, and Sam is seen as the brains of the operation, as the thinker, as the investigator, as the intelligent one. But there are two moments in this episode that I feel get overlooked, where Dean proves to be the brains of the operation as well.
Yes.
Okay, where he proves that he is smart. So the first one is when they actually get to the crossroads, and Dean looks over, and he knew, first of all, he knew that they were yarrow flowers.
Very specific. That's so
very specific
and ultra specific.
So he knew that they were those flowers. He knew that they were used in summoning rituals, and he knew that they were not native to that area. And the fact that they were in those weeds, he knew that somebody had to have planted them there as a summoning ritual. The second part of the knowledge is when Dean talks about the music and how there's so much lore around Crossroads demons and demon deals and hellhounds and everything else written into this music. We know that Dean loves and is obsessed with music, but I also think this is because he specifically was looking for anything that had to do with lore, any kind of research, and he discovered these almost accidentally by like keyword. There's one that he names that's about a Crossroads demon. And he talks about how there's so much lore packed into those songs and that music that it should be something that all hunters know, but Sam had no idea. Sam had never even heard of that musical artist. So like, that's another moment where we really sit back and go, wow, Dean has not only done his research, he dug deep into this research.
I have one more note related to kind of commitment. And that's about the final conversation that Sam and Dean have in the car about John and his legacy, where Dean says, you know, he should have gone out fighting. That was supposed to be his legacy. And he's just like mourning the fact that he's like, he shouldn't have gone out saving me. He should have gone out fighting. And Sam says, you know, we're still here, so we gotta like keep going. And you know, everything Dad taught us about saving people, everything that we're able to do because of what Dad taught us, like that's his legacy. And it made me think about like the commitment that John made to hunting this demon, and how like it's interesting because like legacy is one of those things that you can try for, but ultimately your legacy is just as much about how you're perceived as in how you want to be perceived. And it's super interesting with someone like John, where, you know, Sam and Dean are like, Sam says, you know, like his dad's legacy is that he taught us how to hunt. And it's interesting because as a viewer of the show, that's not how I think about John's legacy at all.
Right.
I think about John's legacy in the fact that he was this obsessed person who really caused a lot of harm to his kids, who could have actually raised them in a way that would have set them up for their rest of their lives. Even if hunting was going to be a part of his life, he could have done that in a way that wouldn't have traumatized his kids in the same way, that could have connected them to Hunter Network. So I see John's legacy as very different than Sam and Dean are imagining it in this section.
Especially when we see especially when we see the comparison with like Ellen and Joe.
Yes,
because
exactly.
we see that Ellen is this loving, doting mother who, yeah, she's a little harsh with her daughter, but it's because she wants to keep her safe. Yeah. John could have been that. He could have been a loving, doting father who was harsh with them because he wanted to keep them safe. They could have a settled residence, a home that they lived in. They could have gone out to hunts and then come home at the end of the day. They could have had that family dynamic that Ellen and Joe and, you know, Joe's father until he died had,
and still been hunters, because Joe's skill is, Joe has skill. It's not that Joe was like isolated from the hunting world and didn't know any. It's not like her parents were hunters and she was sort of left in the dark and they were just like, oh, we'll protect her by not ever letting her know. They made sure she could protect herself, but they also didn't, you know, it was also pretty clear when we meet
her
Joe
into the world.
She wasn't going on hunts as an 11-year-old.
Right.
And
being used as bait.
Or being used as bait. See, this is the legacy. This is the legacy of John Winchester, is that like he to his death is still working on this one mission. And it's sort of like just collateral damage is not the word I'm looking for. It's just sort of like coincidental that Sam and Dean became good hunters. You know, like, yes, they learned a lot from their dad, but it's just sort of like they learned a lot from their. It's not because John was like, I'm going to turn you into really good hunters. It was like John was like, we have to find this demon, so you're going to become good hunters.
I have always said that Dean and Sam became good hunters in spite of John, not because of John. Because if you watch this series, there are literally, I am not over exaggerating, there are hundreds of moments where John either ill prepared them, didn't prepare them at all, knew something that was important knowledge that he didn't share with them, or they learned a better way just by simply analyzing the situation.
Yeah.
There are so many times that Dean and Sam have surpassed John as a good hunter.
Oh, even in the first season. Even in the first season.
Even when he was still alive, they had already surpassed him as a hunter, because his mindset was so narrow, and it was so black and white, and it was so laser focused on the yellow-eyed demon that everything else was not quite collateral damage, but it happened just as a way to get to that yellow-eyed demon, whereas Dean and Sam are actual hunters. I think of John as a casual hunter who was obsessed with one demon. So his goal was not killing demons, killing vampires, ridding the world of evil. Those things were just things that happened along the way on his mission to getting to the yellow-eyed demon.
That's, I think, a really, really good way to say it. Because it comes down to commitment as well, because that was John's commitment. John's commitment was find the thing that killed Mary. Sam and Dean's commitment at
their
the
commitment
season
is
one,
saving the world.
And it's the saving people, hunting things. They have taken John's obsession,
narrow vision,
and they have, I think, because of their care for each other, because of their sense of caring for the world around them, they have taken it to be like I think an unexpected consequence of the fact that they hunted a lot as kids is that they had the opportunity, like Dean particularly, to save people, and that's what got stuck in his brain. That's what became the reason that he does things, of like not finding the demon because it killed Mary, but like finding the demon so it doesn't kill anyone else.
Correct.
And it's really interesting that both Dean and Sam have gotten there. And like Sam in season one, we kind of see that process happen, where at the beginning of season one, Sam is also very focused on
the yellow-eyed demon to avenge Jess.
It's a revenge mission. It's not a saving people mission. And by the end of season one, he's also willing to sacrifice. He's also willing to like let the yellow-eyed demon go, if that means that they don't lose John. He's not going to shoot John to get the yellow-eyed demon. He's not going, because he's made a different choice. He's made a different commitment. He's made a commitment to Dean. He's made a commitment to the hunt. He's made a commitment to
all of the unnamed people they haven't met yet that they could save.
Exactly, which is going to be like, we're going to see over the course of the rest of season 2, we're going to see a number of instances of that. We're going to see that, particularly there's an episode called What Is and What Never Should Be, and that's going to delve right into why do they hunt? Why are they in this life? And it does really come down to what are their commitments, and this episode's such an interesting one for that. Well, we're going to move from our theme discussion. So one thing that we've been doing this season is we've been picking a couple of theme songs to make a little episode mixtape for this week. Yeah, do you want to go first and share the song and why you've chosen it today?
Every single time that I rewatch an episode, I remember exactly what I felt at that moment and how I felt at that moment. And this episode always brings me back to the song Bravado by Rush. The song is very repetitive, but there is literally one section that is so spot on the nose for this episode. I'm just going to quote it because I'm not going to sing. So it goes, all the hope and glory, all the sacrifice in vain. And if love remains though everything is lost, we will pay the price, but we will not count the cost.
Oh, damn, that's so, like on the nose.
It's dead on the nose for this episode in so many ways. So all the hope and glory, all the sacrifice in vain. Obviously, like the architect and the doctor and the painter, they had all this, hopes for their future and all this, like the doctor was the youngest chief resident of the hospital, and the architect had, multi-million-dollar deals, and they had all this glory, but it was all in vain because 10 years later, Hellhound comes knocking. But then it shifts into if love remains, though everything is lost. And that reminds me of the fourth victim, Evan. Who he's like, I am willing to die. I would make this again because through my death, she gets to live, she gets to survive. And my love for her is more powerful than my love for myself. But the final line of "we will pay the price, but we will not count the cost" reminds me of that. Not only does it remind me of the artist when he says, "No, it wasn't worth it. Absolutely, it was not worth it." It reminds me of the very end when they're in the car and it's the confrontation with Sam, and he's like, "You weren't really going to take that deal, were you?" And Dean remains silent.
Cannot answer him. Doesn't even attempt
to
tell him no.
So in that moment, "we will pay the price, but we will not count the cost." I always think of that moment when they're in the car, because I can see the wheels in Dean's head turning about what is the cost that I would be willing to pay for, what is the price I would be willing to pay for this? And it relates so hard to the second, to the ending of season 2, because he finds out exactly the price that he's willing to pay. And is the cost worth it? Because that's what demon deals are.
Yeah.
They're willing to pay the price up front, but 10 years later, when the cost comes due,
and that's
then all
of
a sudden it's not worth it.
And that's the thing with these deals, is that no matter how much you think the cost, you don't. Which is the thing with any kind of like commitment that requires a sacrifice. Is like we always say, count the cost before you make a decision, but it's impossible to fully know the cost.
The Crossroads demon even points that out to Dean when she's like, "You should have taken that deal. I would have brought your father back." See, everybody thinks they know what hell is, but that's nothing like what it really is. Like, it's so much worse. It's so horrible. It's so awful. If you knew what your father was going through right now, you would have absolutely taken that deal.
Yeah.
So she is literally like, you should have thought of the cost of what your father is going through.
The cost of not making a commitment.
No. Correct.
Either choice you make, there is cost.
And that they come to that, I hate to use the word crossroads, but that's literally what it is.
Yeah,
they come to that crossroads so many times throughout this series of, we know what the right decision is, but are we willing to pay the price?
And do we know?
And then there are times,
do we know what the cost is?
Do we know what the cost is? And then there are times where they know exactly what the cost is and they're willing to pay it, but they also don't know what the fallout from paying that cost will be later on down the line.
Okay. The song that I have chosen is "Could Have Been Me" by the Struts, and I will also read a little bit of lyric from there because it's interesting because it works so well with the one you chose. The first couple of lines are, "Don't want to live as an untold story, rather go out in a blaze of glory. I can't hear you, I don't fear you. I'll live now because the bad die last. Dodging bullets with your broken past. I can't hear you, I don't fear you now." Thinking about, again, that last conversation and thinking about John and the concept of legacy and commitment. John has made these choices that mean that he is remembered. His story is told. He goes out in this sort of blaze of glory, but at what cost? The next lines of this song are, "Wrapped in your regret, what a waste of blood and sweat." And this whole song is all about, how are you remembered? What is your legacy? What do you want? And then also what happens to you? Like, how does this affect everyone else around you? I don't have anything super eloquent to say about it, but if you listen to these two songs together and think about this episode, I think it's going to be a bit of a whammy of feelings.
Absolutely.
So next we're going to move into our Going Meta segment, where we are tracking lore, the Bechdel test, pop culture, and more. Some of this we'll obviously have talked about a bit in our episode discussion. It was hard to avoid, particularly lore. So we will just talk about the stuff we haven't covered so far. First, in terms of our death counter in this episode, there are, I think, just the 3 deaths.
Unless we count the original, the very first way back in the 1800s in Mississippi, like him. Unless we count him, yes, it is just the 3.
And in terms of the Bechdel test, do we pass today? Let's think.
We failed 100 times over.
There's never 2 female characters on screen at the same time, is there?
No.
There
are not. And even when there is a female character present, every single time there is a female character present, they are talking about males, with the exception of the doctor's maid, who talks about her, about how she's not here, she's not here, she's not here.
So hard fail today. Next, in terms of lore, we've talked quite a bit about lore. Obviously, this is the first introduction of Crossroads demons. and Crossroad deals. That's going to be really significant for lore.
This is also the first time that we get hellhounds.
Yes,
and they discover that hellhounds are real, but the person who is not like actively, who didn't make the deal, can't see the hellhound, can't hear the hellhound, and that's really very important information for later.
Yeah, we also have the face distortion,
the hallucinations.
If when a hellhound is nearby, when your deal is coming due, that you have hallucinations that affect your perception of even people really near and dear to you, which is a really interesting thing that again is going to come back. And I do appreciate that this episode is pretty consistent. What they do with Crossroads deals and what they do with hellhounds is going to be what they continue to do when those reoccur.
Correct. Especially with the Crossroads demons, because the Crossroads demons always have red eyes.
Yes, that's all the other new thing.
Which the regular demons have black eyes, but we've been introduced, because before we only knew that demons have black eyes, but for some reason the yellow-eyed demon had yellow eyes. Yeah. And that was the only other obtuse color that we knew of. And this is the first introduction that we find out that demons have colored eyes based on basically like their rank and position. Yeah, and their role. Which is their role. So like regular run-of-the-mill demons have black eyes. Yellow-eyed demon is obviously much higher, so his are yellow, and Crossroads demons have red eyes. Yeah.
The only thing that I thought with lore that I was like, I forgot that, is the third victim, the artist, says, I didn't know the demon, like after it made my deal, it stuck around and made a bunch more. And for a week. And the mechanics of that were interesting to me. Anyway, I'm curious to know if you've made a connection there, because I can't remember.
Okay, what I am going to say is I cannot remember what season and episode these things take place. So please know that these are spoilers for things in the future, not this season, but much further down the line. Okay, so we, when Dean and Sam go to the farm where the farmhand had made the deal to find the oil on the farm to save the farm. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. I'm trying to remember
that's season 8, because that's what starts the trials.
Yes. Okay, yes, season 8, yeah.
So we find out that demon, which was Crowley, has made 3 or 4 deals while he was there for the week, that he stayed with them there. Okay, he had dinner with them. He made multiple deals with not only her, but with one of the women, one of the men, one of the other men.
So there's a time
one
frame.
Of the other women.
There's a consistent time frame here of a week.
We also hear about it in there's one where they go to a house and somebody had made a deal, and they heard about 2 or 3 that had already died earlier that week. And
is that one of the flashback ones? Is it the one
with Mary?
Is it in the beginning? I think it might be in the beginning.
Yes. And it's when they flash back with Mary, and they're at that like farmhouse.
Yes. Okay.
And they're talking about like 2 or 3 had already died.
Yes. Because that's what sets Dean onto that case.
Correct. So there's 2 other instances that once the Crossroads demon has been summoned, they stick around for a minute and try and pull as many as they can during that week before they, continue on.
Okay, cool. That's super cool lore. In terms of story-based locations, it's Missouri, I believe, for the whole episode. Yeah, in terms of filming locations for this episode, there's not really anything of note. Lloyd's Bar is just a street off of, like in Delta, north of an airport. I think it's just a set piece based on the way it's filmed, and we don't actually spend very much time in it.
We don't ever go inside, yeah.
So I think it's honestly just a set piece that they set up. They do that a few times in these early seasons. Nothing really of note there. Pop culture. There are a few references in this episode.
I know because I'm obsessed with Star Wars. My dog is named after a Star Wars character. So obviously when Dean made maybe the place is full of women in Princess Leia bikinis, I noted that one because I was like, ah.
It's a Star Wars reference. It's, we've gotten our quota of 1 Star Wars reference per every couple of episodes, which is, I love it. The only other ones that we're not going to talk about all of them. There's a few others, but Dean makes a reference to a TV series from 1963 called Let's Make a Deal, when he says nobody put a gun to their head and forced them to play Let's Make a Deal. And that's a reference to a TV series from the 60s. The only other funny cultural reference that I noted was the MySpace comment, because I just thought that was like really hilarious that Dean doesn't know what MySpace is. I'm like, I know you are not using the internet a whole lot, but you don't know what MySpace is? Really?
Right. Especially at that point, because listen, that was what, 2006? You should know what MySpace is.
Like I get it, Dean. You are not savvy. You like to be like, you like your old car and your tape deck music,
old cassette tapes.
We get it,
movies.
But like, you don't have to pretend you don't know what MySpace is, because that's what this comes up as, is him being like, huh, what is MySpace? You know what MySpace is. Just because you don't use it.
It kind of reminded me of those times where men will, like, they'll have the receipt with like a woman's phone number scratched at the bottom, and they're like, oh ho, I don't know what this is, and somebody would be like, oh dude, she gave you her phone number. It very much reminded me of that. It does. The playing dumb and not knowing what it is, so that I can brag about show off. Exactly. That's exactly what it felt like for me.
Will often brag to Sam about these sorts of scenarios when he gets a girl's number. So this is just like a roundabout way of him doing it. But yeah, no, that's a good comparison, because I was like, that's what I was getting the vibes of. Lastly, we have our gaydar section. So this is anything related to gender and sexuality that we noted in the episode.
The most specific thing that I could point out is when he is making the deal with the demon, and it cuts back to him, like it cuts to, Sam and Evan and the scratching, and the demon dog stops, and it cuts back to Dean and the demon, and she's kissing him. And when he pulls back, he's like, what is that for? And she says, that she had to solidify the deal. And he says something like, I usually like to be warned before I'm accosted by demon tongue, or something like that.
Yeah.
And that moment I find so pivotal, because it literally, maybe not pivotal, but because Dean is seen as such like a ladies' man and such, I mean, I don't want to use the word whore, but he's basically seen as a womanizer and very fluid about, having sex with whomever, whenever, blah, blah, blah. But that specific moment is so good for me, because it shows that he very much always and forever respects consent and boundaries. And he felt that he had not been, like, clearly she didn't say, clearly she didn't say we have to kiss to seal the deal, like others later in the series have said. She didn't give him that warning. She just leaned in and kissed him to seal the deal. And he was very much like, what was that for?
Like, hold the brakes there. Like, this was not, I did not ask for this.
I did not ask for this or consent to it, which makes me so happy, because like, up until this point, he's seen as such a womanizer. And I feel like that can be a negative connotation on him. When in reality, this one specific moment shows that even if he does sleep with whomever and whenever, it's very much, he makes sure that there's consent, that it's mutual, that it is asked upon, that it is agreed upon, that everybody is fully willing and happy in the scenario. And that makes me feel good.
And I think there's future evidence to support that as well, but I appreciate that we have it. I appreciate that you made it.
There absolutely is. It becomes blatantly obvious later on in the other seasons.
He's only interested if the other person's interested.
Correct. But up until this point, it just feels like in the series, they've played him the other way. Correct. Yeah, they've made him seem like a womanizer that is very much the dude bro that's like, oh, she'd be lucky to sleep with me.
Yeah.
When in reality, that moment shows me that he is very critical about his partners and making sure that everybody is on board.
Yeah, which is interesting too, because I think there was another line, and I can't remember it now, but it's interesting because, well, we've talked about this in some of our other episodes as well, about how often, Dean is in the role of like the woman in like the traditional role of a woman in a lot of like relationships, in a lot of the positioning with him and John and Sam, in the fact that he's often the bait. There's a lot of interesting things with that. And so I think what you're saying is connecting to that as well. Like it's flipped from what you usually see.
What you expect.
What you usually see in television is the opposite, where the male character is,
especially with how macho and like masculine and very dominant. They tried to make his personality to have him be in that feminine-ish stylized role and to be the person that's like,
Yeah, I
it very
appreciate
much
that a
flips
lot.
that script. Yeah.
I appreciate that a lot, that he is not, that they didn't go with because they could have, based on some of the other characterization, that they didn't go with him being like, oh, you know, that, like, he didn't, it was non-consensual, and it was very clear that that was not okay, that was like a violation as well.
Because they very much could have been like, because the demon was in, I mean, she looked hot. She was a very beautiful woman.
He's not discriminatory in that sense. Like, in terms of, like, he doesn't have he tends to, like, show his interest in a lot of different kinds of people. Notice I said people.
So people, very people.
It's an important choice of words.
So she was beautiful, and obviously, like, if she wasn't a demon, Dean probably would have been interested in her. So the fact that they could have played it as a, haha, at least I got a kiss out of the deal. They could have played it that way. They could have played it as a, well, at least I got something good out of the deal. Instead, they played it as a, that was not okay.
Of a, like, you should have warned me, I'm uncomfortable. And like, that wasn't something I asked for, which is I think that's the only real thing in this episode for that, but I think it's an important one that we talked about. Finally, today we have our Q&A segment. So in this segment, we're attempting to propose an answer to something the episode doesn't explicitly answer, particularly related to writing, filming, or acting. And I think you will appreciate, we talked about this like a little bit, but I think you'll appreciate this question. If any listeners would like to submit a question for this segment, send us a voicemail or tag us on TikTok or Twitter, and we'd be thrilled to use a question in a future episode. So my question is actually around the deal that the Crossroads demon offers Dean to bring John back. My question is actually, and this is going to be a question that is going to inevitably contain spoilers, because the reason I'm asking it is because of things that we know for the future. My question is actually on whether or not she's able to bring, was that ever really on the table? Like, she plays it like it is. I'm curious from a lore perspective, knowing what we know about the Yellow-Eyed Demon and the Yellow-Eyed Demon's plans, knowing about the seals, is this another way that they were potentially going to try and get Dean to break that first seal? This is not a very straightforward question. I'm just curious as to kind of like, was Dean going to take the deal? Like, was he really seriously considering it? And then also, what would that have looked like if she had brought John back?
Okay, so basically, would he have taken the deal? Was it possible for her to have done the deal? Mm-hmm. Do we think that the deal is related to breaking the seals?
Yes.
And was it a way to potentially get Dean sooner rather than later?
Yes.
Okay, so yes, I think it's possible, because as we see at the end of season 2, they are able to bring Sam back to life. Mm-hmm. At least for me, I think length of time gone doesn't matter, because once you're down there, you are just down there, and you know what I mean? Like,
so they don't care about the logistics. Spot. They don't care about the logistics of, like, you suddenly reappearing on Earth alive. They don't really care about what impact that has.
Yeah, because that's not their job problem to figure out. So yes, I think it's possible, because we see it is possible later on with Sam. Do I think that it relates to the seals? No, and I'll tell you why. Because I feel like Lucifer has been like MIA for this whole fucking period. Everybody else is just kind of ruling hell as they see fit.
And they're not factoring Lucifer into any of the decisions that they're making in hell at this point.
Correct. Yep. It's basically like, they each have their own boss. So like the regular demons have a boss, the Crossroads demons have a boss. Everybody has like a boss that they report to, and those bosses just make sure that their specific wheel keeps turning. Yeah. There's nobody in the driver's seat.
There's no big plan.
The wheels, right. There's nobody in the driver's seat, but the wheels are keeping turning because they've been told to keep them turning. So later on, again, spoilers for like season 4 and 5, later on we find out, the seals breaking is what happens to bring Lucifer back, and with Lilith and everything else. But it seems like only specific demons knew about it until then. Like, it was kept very hush hush in the inner circle so that nobody fucked it up, basically.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So I would think that the lower class demons, or even like just the regular demons and or the Crossroads demons, probably wouldn't know about that, because what use are they in the grand scheme?
Right.
I think it only had to deal with the demons that were useful in the grand scheme. So like, obviously Meg was important because she was, you know, ushering the boys, and Ruby was important because she was getting Sam, and, you know, like all of these
Lilith
other people. Yeah. And Lilith, those people were important to the plan. If they weren't directly involved in the plan, they probably didn't know about it, because why would they need to?
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And that also makes sense with, you know, so the reason that she knows about Dean, the reason she knows about John's deal is more likely just like coworker gossip.
Yes.
She knows because she's talked to the other demon.
She even says, I get the newsletter. So it very much to me seems like it's just gossip of, because you have to remember, like, the Winchesters, even at this point, are a big name in the supernatural community because they kill these things. They send these things back. Like, and at this point, like, they have figured out how to exorcise demons and send them back to hell.
Yeah, they've started causing big problems.
Correct. So I think it's more of a, we got one Winchester, let me try and get another viewpoint. Because I think the yellow-eyed demon kept his plan very close to the chest on a need-to-know basis. And I think Lucifer kept his plan very close to the chest on a need-to-know basis. So, like, the Crossroads demons probably had no applicable skills to making sure those things came out right. So it didn't matter. However, on the flip side of that, John has been in hell for how long at this point?
Probably not very long. It's probably been like I want to say it's only been a month or two topside. We're only like 8 episodes into the season.
Well, 8 episodes would be, each month equals 10 years downstairs. So John's been in hell for roughly 20 to 30 years at this point, and the seal has not broken. I'm not going to go into that because I truly don't think that he withstood the rack. That's just my personal headcanon. I
honestly don't think that as well. I think that he broke, and they realized that him breaking didn't break the seal, and they went, fuck, we got the wrong one. They went, he's not a righteous man, because that's the
correct.
They went, we can't.
That's the whole thing. That's the whole thing. It's not him because he's not righteous.
Yeah, which would track with everything else.
Right. So I think my thing is at that point, John had broken, and it hadn't broken the seal. So on the flip side of, I don't think the Crossroads demons were involved, is maybe the Crossroads demons were involved, because at that point they would know that John had broken and it didn't break the seal. So maybe they were trying to get Dean to take that deal because they wanted a solid contract on his soul. Because since Dean is the righteous man, without that deal, he would have gone to heaven. He's the righteous man. Right. He never would have ended up in hell.
And with the kind of life that he lives, the chance of that happening,
saving people,
the chance of that happening at any point, he's already had a couple of close misses. The fact that how easy it would be for something to take him out,
right,
and them to be like, oh fuck, we've lost our chance now.
We lost it. Exactly. So I think part of me thinks that them offering that contract was because they needed to have that solid hold on his soul, regardless of how he died, because they can say, I'll give you 10 years, but if you fuck up and die on a hunt, you're still dead. You're still going to hell.
Well, exactly. We're not coming for you.
That's why I think she was fine with offering the 10 years, because she knew that more likely than not, he was going to die before those 10 years were up, and they were going to get to cash in on that deal early. But she knew that this version of Dean, this very black and white, not going to take the deal version of Dean, needed to have that buffer of, it'll be 10 years of you and your brother and your father together.
He wasn't going to take it for 1 year. Not at that point.
He absolutely would not have.
There was no like we said earlier, there was no
desperation. Whereas later on, they knew that they could bank on his desperation. They knew that that demon could have offered him a week. I'll give you 1 week to make sure that Sam is alive, that he's okay, and that you set him up for the next, for however long. I'll give you 1 week. Dean would have taken
he would have taken that deal at any point. He would have taken that deal, I think, even if it was like, I get to see that he's alive.
An instant. I get to see him wake up, and then I'll go.
That's a really good answer. So that will bring us to the end of our show. You can subscribe to Driver Picks the Podcast wherever you get your shows, and please come talk to us on social media or submit a question for a future episode through the link in the show notes. Jay, do you want to say just again where people can find you and anything else that you wanted to let listeners know?
Yeah, so I am on TikTok as JSTL. It is JAISTIEL. I also have a backup account, which is JSTL 2.0. You can also follow me on Instagram. My Instagram is sassy, SASSY, Stoneheart, STONEHART. There is no E in heart for Stoneheart. But that's my Instagram. It is public, so you can go and see all of my drag pictures and everything else that's on there. Also, I will be at the Supernatural New Jersey convention at the end of April. If you do want to come up and say hi to me, I will be there. I'm going to be surrounded by a whole bunch of people that I don't know, so please come say hi.
That's super exciting. Thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. This was really fun.
It was so fun. Anytime. You're welcome back anytime.
Please remember me when you get into Castiel season.
Oh, for sure. Definitely. Please come back in season 4. Please come back.
Yes. Once we start getting Dean and Cass parallels, please tag me in, Coach.
Will do. Keeping you on the bench and ready to go. I don't know how sports works. It's fine. No, I know how one sport works. I know how hockey works. It's the only. Okay, that's. I am a stereotype. I know. I'm a parody of myself. Anyway, it's worse. I'm one day going to have to recommend the 2 different hockey AUs that I really, really love. They'll probably be recommendations one of these days because they're both just so good. Thank you all for coming along for the ride, and we wish you a peaceful road until we meet again. Next week, we will be discussing Season 2, Episode 9, Croatoan, through the theme of judgment. A note to our listeners. This episode was recorded prior to our Season 3 name change, where we went from Driver Picks the Podcast to Saving People, Queering Things. For all of our new social media platforms, visit queeringthingspodcast.com.